الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكرك الغافلون. So today's subject of course interlinks with one of the subjects that I did in previous times in the same masjid, which was regarding the Khilafah, the Caliphate. But Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala was not a Khalifa. He was a Sultan. And he would fall inshaAllah under the hadith سَبْعَةٌ يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, that there are 7 people Allah places a shade over them on the Day of Judgment. The first one that is mentioned is a just Sultan, a just king or a ruler. But even though he was not the Khalifa of the time, he gave his oath of allegiance to the Khalifa. So the Khilafah was already established from the time of Al-Khulafa Al-Rashidun, but with successive generations from the Bani Umayyah, many of whom were unrighteous. The successors after them, Banu Abbas, some of whom were righteous and some who were unrighteous. The Banu Abbas continued into that time, the time of Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi, rahimahullah ta'ala, the successorship of one Khalifa after another. But during his time, meaning at the time of his birth and subsequently after his birth, it was a time of disunity. So you had the Al-Ubaidiyah, who are referred to sometimes as Fatimiyya, but the Fatimi dynasty. They ruled North Egypt, so modern day Egypt, Northern Africa, including Egypt. And they had ruled that region for 300 years. So this was segmenting the Khilafah, the territories of the Caliphate at the time. Meaning there were different claimants to Khilafah at various times in history. So for instance, when the Banu Abbas overwhelmed the Bani Umayyah fled to Spain, conquered Spain and declared a separate caliphate. But the oath of allegiance was given to the Banu Abbas. Now because the Banu Abbas could not reach them in Spain, they were left to their own civilization for hundreds of years. But there was a period of time when the Ubaidis, they referred to as Fatimiyya because they claimed the descendancy from Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha. But in reality they were not descendants, they were not ashraf, they were not from the prophetic household. They ruled for a few hundred years over North Egypt, North Africa and Egypt, including for around 90 years, the Haramain, the 2 holy sanctuaries. So Ibn Hajar al-Haytami al-Makki, the famous Shafi'i scholar, he's in fact in the Shafi'i school, when you choose the tarjih opinion, meaning what we call in the Hanafi school the mufta bihi opinion, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami al-Makki is the scholar that we refer back to, one of the scholars alongside al-Ramli, to check what the fatwa is in the Shafi'i school. But Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, he has a book on the Shia which is known as As-Sawa'iq al-Muhriqa, and he mentions the 90-year rule of the so-called Fatimi dynasty over Egypt. And when they ruled Egypt, they ruled also the two holy sanctuaries. He mentions the incident when the man went to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, and he was a traveler, and he asked for some food from some of the people there. And one of the people took him back to the house, to their own, and had his tongue cut off. And then the man went back to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ with his tongue in his hand and fell asleep. And he saw Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu in the company of the Prophet ﷺ, and they placed the tongue back into his mouth, and when he awoke, the tongue was back in his mouth, meaning a miracle, mu'jiza. Of course, this was the belief of people in that time, like Ibn Hajar al-Haytami and others, even Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi. These were the type of correct beliefs that they had. So Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah ta'ala, not to be confused with Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the commentator on Bukhari, he mentions this incident and the period of time when the Fatimi, so-called Fatimi, really they refer to as Al-Ubaydi. The Al-Ubaydi dynasty ruled North Africa. Additional to that, Syria and the Levant was different territories, different cities. So you had Halab, which is Aleppo. Everyone knows now Aleppo because of the Syrian civil war. You have Hims, you have Damascus, you have Hama, all these different cities. Some of them were colonized by the Crusaders at the time. So what they call Sawahib al-Bahr, which is the regions closer to the Mediterranean Sea, all these regions were occupied territory, occupied by the Crusaders, who had major fortresses built and constructed in that region. Fortresses like Crac des Chevaliers, very difficult to penetrate. The modern version of that would be Tel Aviv and the Israeli occupation of that region also. But the Muslims of the Levant, Syria, were divided. So you had different kingdoms ruling Syria at the time, but infighting amongst the Muslims. Then you had the Khalifa in Baghdad, who ruled a region from Iraq, what we refer to as Iraq. But remember, the modern map, of course, is post-colonial, but the map was slightly different then. And the methods of governing were slightly different because of the cultural differences. Now we live in a post-colonial Anglo power structure. Post-colonial Anglo power structure, which makes some of the policies of Sultan Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala be viewed in a different light in a post-colonial world, which we will come to later. But that was the setting in which the stage was set for the likes of Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala, without doubt, that many people here and other Muslims will agree was one of the greatest Muslim rulers in our history. So the background relates to Sultan Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala, who sometimes is ignored by populist speakers, meaning some speakers, they may capitalize on the name of Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala, but they will not mention the backdrop to his rule, which consisted of having the right hand guiding him, which was the hand of Nuruddin Zengi. Now, the governance of Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala, as opposed to just the history, the governance, is understood better when we understand the biography of Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala. So, Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala was born in 532. So Hijri calendar, 532. Remember, the Crusades had been launched after 1066. So in our island of Britain, 1066 marks the date when the invaders from Normandy entered into Britain. Why did they enter Anglo-Saxon Britain? Ostensibly to attain the silver of Britain. Well, Britain didn't exist at the time. The silver of England. So there was a different, what we call Britain today is a later concept after Oliver Cromwell. But at that time, they entered Anglo-Saxon England in order to attain the wealth of England. Ostensibly, this was the reason. But if you note historically, from 1066 to 1099, what was launched 33 years later, in 1099, was what we term today as the Crusades. And in 1099, the city of Jerusalem was ransacked by the pillagers from Europe, including the Crusaders from the British Isles. So there is a link between the Norman conquest of England and the later invasion of the city of Jerusalem and the pillaging of the city of Jerusalem. This occurred in 1099 CE. 1099 CE. And the city was taken back by the Muslims 71 years later. But the backdrop is that Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi is born in the year 532 in Tikrit. Now Tikrit at that time, which is in modern day Iraq, it is the same town in which he was born Saddam Hussein. That's why Saddam Hussein would have elaborate drawings made of himself and an imaginary portrait of Salahuddin Ayubi. To his credit, he was the only Arab leader to launch rockets into Tel Aviv, to his credit. But of course, Saddam Hussein is another controversial figure. But Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala was born in Tikrit. Now to a Kurdish family. So this shows that rulership was not judged in accordance with ethnicity at that time. Meaning, what is deemed as Arab nationalism today, or pan-Arabism, at that time there was no such concept, because what was deemed important was the religion adopted by the ruler. So despite ethnicity, what was demanded from the ruler is that the ruler be Muslim. But Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala, his name was Yusuf, and Salahuddin is his laqab, his nickname. His kunya is at Norman is Abu Muzaffar. Born into this family of Kurds, his father rahimahullah ta'ala was one of the advisors to Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala. So Nuruddin Zengi was an elder to Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala. Initially, Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala was the ruler of the city of Hadab, inheriting the city from his father. Now these were Turkic people. So Nuruddin Zengi was a Turk, thin, brown in color, meaning that is the physical description given for Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala. He inherited rulership from his father, but later in the year 549, he conquered the city of Damascus. So this was after multiple attempts to take the city of Damascus from a Muslim ruler. He wrestled the control of the city of Damascus, which is always central to that region, the city of Damascus. Whoever rules Damascus has the pivotal upper hand with the neighbors. So today, whoever rules Damascus has a pivotal upper hand over the surrounding area. This is a historical and geographical fact. Damascus is a vital city, and this is why Al-Imam al-Mahdi radiallahu anhu, in the end of times, he will make Damascus his capital. Damascus will be the capital of Al-Imam al-Mahdi radiallahu anhu. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, describing the city in one hadith, gives the description of the city like a womb. The way a womb stretches, this city in the end of times will contain many refugees. People will take refuge in the city of Damascus when the different wars occur, like the Armageddon and other wars. Nevertheless, when he took the city of Damascus, what were his first policies? Now, understanding the policies of Nuruddin Zengi is important because they relate to the policies of Salahuddin Ayubi. Firstly, he constructed the fortress of Damascus, showing that one of the first steps that a Muslim ruler should take is defense of the borders. Now, in Sharh al-Aqaid, in other words, the author makes it very clear that one of the tasks of the Khalifa is to protect the borders of the Muslims. Meaning, a modern example of that would be that our borders do not have infiltration of different black operations, of different groups entering, meaning our borders are not porous, where different groups can enter. Different organizations can send militants through the borders. Likewise, in today's day and age, this would include airspace, that the airspace is clear, that pilots cannot fly into the airspace of a country. Likewise, the drones that enter and bomb different places, meaning a person can be sitting in Connecticut in the USA and killing people in Peshawar. This is a possibility. So the first policy, how that would apply in today's day and age, would be that a ruler protect the borders of a Muslim country in order to protect life, civilian life, and the life of the soldiers in the army. So Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala had a fortress constructed and strengthened the city of Damascus. Even though he had made 3 attempts to take the city, that would show that the city was already fortified. But after taking the city, he constructed a fortress which was more impenetrable than the previous fortress. But what additional policies did he have? I mean, in today's day and age, some people would make it out that aside from hudud punishments, corporal punishments, and military operations, Islam has nothing better to offer. Firstly, that would be a result of concentrating on only one aspect of Islamic governance. Sultan Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala had firstly schools made, especially for orphans, free schools. So if you go to Damascus today, some of those buildings still exist, meaning the edifice or the construct of buildings in that time was so good, and in the Ottoman period, that they would use stone. So locally manufactured bricks or stone which is taken from the local mountains was carved out, locally carved stone, and the constructs and the buildings that were made with that stone were so solid that those buildings still survive time. That if you go to Damascus today, you can find those buildings throughout Damascus. Some of those buildings survived the earthquakes, terrible earthquakes in Turkey. If you check some of the pictures, you will find that the modern buildings have collapsed in those pictures, but the Ottoman buildings remain. Why? Because the construct was better, showing that Muslims in that time, or the policies of the likes of Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala, was such that they were able to construct such things without importing foreign people to make those buildings for them. foreign construction companies. So today, applying this governance to today's day and age would be that if you look at the Arab Bedouins today that rule the UAE or the Arabian Peninsula, you will find that they use foreign construction companies to come in and build those skyscrapers that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam foretold. أن ترى الحفاة الرعاة رعاء الشاء يتطاولون في بنيان. You shall see the barefoot herders of goats competing with one another in constructing tall buildings. But the construction is being done by foreign construction companies, with the odd exception, and even the odd exception will have a controversial construction company name, like the Bin Laden construction company. But when they bring in foreign construction companies, some of the Arabs today, the Bedouin Arabs, they think that their countries are developing when they do not realize that the countries that are really developed do not actually destroy their history. So if you go in London, you will find so many historical buildings. But these people, they will build the gear and the equipment to make tall buildings, but they will make the tall buildings with contracts made in other countries. So the first policy he had was constructing schools, but who constructed the schools? The local builders, the local construction companies of the time. So this was beneficial to the country. Additional to that, the education system that was set up was later to benefit the Muslims in the rule of Salahuddin Ayubi, rahimahullah ta'ala. Additional to that, he had an awqaf system set up. Now what is awqaf? Awqaf, the word is plural of waqf. Waqf, we would say, is public endowments. This is today people talk about nationalization of the NHS, nationalization of different things. Awqaf is the Islamic replacement for such a system. What is awqaf? That there is a fund, and from that fund, those things which benefit the public are funded, meaning funding is placed in those things, like hospitals. So you will find that many of the hospitals were opened in that time from the awqaf fund. So these were some of the policies that Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala established. More on this later regarding the awqaf. Now the history of Nuruddin Zengi and Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala is recorded by famous historians. For instance, the book Al-Kami fi Tarikh, famous book on history, and others. But where I have copied some of these notes is from Abu Shama and his history. Now Abu Shama was a famous historian that was born just slightly after the rule of Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah. So he's one of the closest historians to that time. He was a historian that summarized the history of Ibn Asakir, Tarikh Ibn Asakir, which is available even today, an earlier history, which is available in 100 volumes, a history of an early historian. If you check Ibn Asakir, his grave is still in Damascus, near Bab Saghir, the graveyard in Damascus, famous graveyard with so many scholars, like Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali and so many others. But before entering that graveyard, there's a direction to enter the graveyard, there is a roundabout. On the roundabout, there is a grave. When you go near the grave, it has a plaque that this is the grave of Ibn Asakir, the historian. So to the credit of the people there, that they have preserved their history, that they did not demolish the grave, they left the grave on a roundabout and placed a plaque. Now you could imagine if Bedouins were there ruling that area, they would have demolished the grave and demolished all the Bab Saghir. The likes of ISIS and other terrorist groups, they would have demolished all that history. But if you go around Damascus, you will find so many historical sites that have been still preserved up to this day, from the time of Salahuddin Ayubi and other periods of time. So Abu Shama mentioned some of these things. Now, later when Al-Madinatul Munawwara would be governed by Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala, by extension of Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah, Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala had a fortress constructed in Al-Madinatul Munawwara also to protect the city. Remember, the Ottomans fortified these constructs later, castles and fortresses that were built around the cities. These fortresses existed up to 20 years ago. Meaning in Makkah al-Mukarramah, if you went to Hajj or Umrah over 20 years ago, you would have observed the fortress of Makkah al-Mukarramah. But of course the Bedouins had the fortress removed, demolished, and replaced with corporation hotels, meaning hotels belonging to Western corporations. So this is also the lack of governance in the Muslim world today, that the funds that come through Umrah and Hajj, those funds are going into the pockets of Western Anglo corporations and not going back to the Muslims. But of course, these things must be the deals that are struck or made when the West will back a particular government with weaponry. They sell weaponry to those people also, and the arms manufacturers will make money from the Muslim government and then claim to protect them. But then they will make deals that any revenue you are attaining from the Hajj or the Umrah or anything else, we should have permission to build hotels like the Hilton Hotel and others in the Haramain. So this is another policy that we can learn from the likes of Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala, that the funds that are in the Muslim world, the revenue is returned back to the Muslims. So he had a fortress constructed in Al-Madinatul Munawwara, and also a river directed towards Mount Uhud. So the modern version of that would be taps, placing taps in holy sites and making sure people have drinking water. But of course, these were major feats for that time, because if you remember the Khalifa Harun al-Rashid, rahimahullah ta'ala, he had water taken from the Euphrates and directed towards the Arafat. In that time, his wife in fact paid for the project, that a dam, the water was taken from the Euphrates, an aqueduct was made and constructed that would transport the water all the way to Arafat. These were feats achieved by those people in that time, like the likes of Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, the conqueror of Constantinople. When you enter Constantinople, Istanbul or Istanbul, whichever name you decide to name it, you'll notice the construction that was made by Muhammad al-Fatih. If you had hired a modern construction company to make such a fortress, it would take years. But yet Muhammad al-Fatih was able to construct that in that time within a few months. Why? Because the secret behind their rule was not only the material means. The secret behind their rule was the piety that they had. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for them the means through their piety. This is something very important to understand from the lives of these people. That when they had piety, when they feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for them the means by which they had worldly victory also. Now today people go to these cities and are amazed by Istanbul or other cities, and they see a material history that Islam achieved so many things, but they do not realize that there was a spiritual impetus behind these things. There was a great spirituality behind this, and this becomes very clear when you read their biographies. Of course, the famous incident you are all aware of that occurred in the rule of Nuruddin Zengi was which incident? When he saw the Prophet ﷺ in his dream 3 times, in 3 consecutive nights, and on the 3rd night he went and rode to Al-Madinatul Munawwara to find two crusaders attempting to dig a tunnel through the ground to take the body of the Prophet ﷺ. Famous incident. When he reached Al-Madinah al-Munawwarah, he had them executed. It's a long story. But what did he do then? He had an iron ore constructed around the noble grave. That iron ore still exists there today, protecting the noble grave, that no one is able to reach the grave of the Prophet ﷺ and the Shaykhain. This incident is mentioned by Nuruddin Ali as-Samhudi, a historian of Al-Madinah al-Munawwarah, in his book Al-Wafa bi Ahwali Dar al-Mustafa, and others mention it. But it shows us the great spirituality that Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala had. If we apply that with, meaning we analyze that with today's rulers, there is a disconnection between them and their belief regarding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning they do not have that spiritual connection or belief regarding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So where shall they achieve victory? So additional to this, the earnings of Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala, he owned 3 shops in Hims, in the city of Hims. The revenue he would make from those shops is what he would spend on his family. He would not take a wage from the government, from the treasury, Baytul Mal. Remember, Baytul Mal was a name given to what the Prophet ﷺ would gather, sadaqat and charities and different things, and then those charities were redistributed in society. The name given to that was Baytul Mal by Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. But it is permitted for the ruler to take a wage from that. It's permitted, it's not impermissible. But from his piety was that he would make his own money from the 3 shops that he would rent out, and whatever business and trade they would make, the money was sent to him. Sometimes the money would go low, and some members of his family would complain. And then he would reprimand them, saying, what do you expect of me to give you money from the Baytul Mal, the treasury of the Muslims, when that is the wealth of the nation? I cannot give you that wealth. But this was his own personal piety, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was Hanafi in school. So Salahuddin Ayubi, rahimahullah ta'ala, was Shafi'i in school. And Al-Imam Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala was Hanafi in school. Of course, they were Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, meaning Ash'ari and Maturidi, not the later creeds that came in from Najd of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. These are later inventions and later concepts that had no root in that time. Because you have to remember, they lived before the time of Abu al-Abbas Ahmad bin Taymiyyah. Abu al-Abbas Ahmad bin Taymiyyah came after. He came with a few unique positions, like his positions on the names and attributes of Allah, which had some roots in earlier Hanabila, whom Abdul Rahman bin al-Jawzi refuted. But unique positions like prohibiting the visitation of the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, or deeming istighatha, seeking help from the Prophet ﷺ, as shirk. These were later positions forwarded by Ahmad bin Taymiyyah. They were not known in the previous centuries. Then what happened is Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab adopted those positions and declared the Uthmaniyun, the Ottomans, as mushrikeen polytheists, using that as a weapon to wage rebellion against the Khilafah. So in that time, people were followers of the schools of thought that existed up to that time. Later, the schools are only 4. Previously, there were a few other schools that dwindled with time, like the Zahiri schools and other schools. But then the Sunnis adopted one of the 4 schools. So Nuruddin Zangi was a Hanafi in school, and he would apply the fatwa from the Hanafi school or the Shafi'i school, depending on where the maslahah, the benefit was for the Muslims. So what happened, his strict nature was such that at one time he had a sheikh that he had i'tiqad in belief in regarding his piety, because these people believed in the piety of what the Sunni Muslims refer to as awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who exist in every age. So there was a particular person that he had good i'tiqad belief in regarding his piety. He would send him gifts at different times. One day it reached him that this pious man is playing something similar to polo. So this sport polo, which the English upper class play, they actually took that sport from Central Asia. It's a Central Asian sport. And it reached him that this pious person is playing polo. So Nuruddin Zengi wrote a letter to him saying, I am disappointed that you, a man of your status, play something of this nature, meaning riding horses and going after a ball. So the pious man wrote a letter back saying that we live on the borders where we have the enemies, meaning the Crusaders, attacking the towns and villages regularly. If we do not train the horses to run all the time, the horses become lazy. So we use the sport to train the horses, which of course is permitted in Sharia. But this shows the strictness of Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala. He accepted the excuse from the Shaykh, and he accepted the excuse and allowed him to continue playing these sports. But what does this tell you? The training of the army is something necessary. That in every age, the ruler must ensure that the army is always training, not like these Bedouin armies we have now, that they sit around with the gun and half of them will not even know how to use the gun. No, the army must have regular training around the year, even if there is no war. This is something that rulers must adopt. What other policies did he do? There are taxes which are known as like dariba. Dariba is a tax on traders, and ushr is a 1/10 tax, which is taken from some of the people. Additional to that, maks is also a tax. Sultan Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala removed all these taxes, which is interesting because we live in a time where the world, the post-colonial world with the Anglo power structure is ruled by the IMF and other banking systems. So it is virtually impossible for some rulers, ostensibly, outwardly, that they can avoid taxes. So some of them would want to place taxes on the people. But of course, this goes back to the issue of economy. But Nuruddin Zengi, remember, at that time, Muslims were more economically independent. So the currency at that time was gold and silver, and then inferior quality coins, which were less quality than gold and silver. Those coins were in circulation amongst the people at that time. So if the gold became less, then the prices would go high. And if the gold was in abundance, then the prices would go down. But they were not controlled, the economy was not controlled by the foreign powers at that time. So it was possible for someone like Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah to remove some of the taxes. So some of the taxes were removed. Now, I do remember Boris Johnson mentioning in one of his speeches that he would take the policy to relieve people of taxes, because he quotes Ibn Khaldun, which I found interesting. Now Ibn Khaldun has his famous book, the Tarikh, the history, and he's a Tunisian scholar, and he also has a Muqaddimah, which is one of the first early works on sociology. But he quotes Ibn Khaldun as saying that if taxes are lowered, this can increase economy. Now, I never bothered checking that quote. Of course, the person citing the quote is unreliable, a known liar, Boris Johnson. But the quote was interesting, because reading the biography of Nuruddin Zengi and seeing that he lowered the taxes. Why would he have lowered the taxes? Because sometimes the traders need the additional money when they retain the additional money, this leads to prosperity amongst the traders and the merchants. When there is prosperity amongst the merchant class, there is more distribution of wealth, because they would need to hire workers and pay their wages, and the money then is distributed easily. But if the government is raising the taxes, when they raise the taxes, then the money is kept by the rulers and not redistributed. Now, in the case of Pakistan, raising the taxes recently, in the past year, the money is going back to the IMF. The money is not being redistributed amongst the local population. The money is going back to the IMF because they need to pay their loans. I think 13th loan that they have taken from the IMF. But this was an interesting policy of Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala. Likewise, Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala would hear complaints directly. So when the local people in the city of Damascus especially would have a complaint, he removed the middle people. Now, what did he do? He opened something known as Darul Adl. Darul Adl, the place of justice in Damascus. I'll go on to that later, but prior to that, what happened was Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala was training using again a sport which is used for warfare. While training, he saw two men pointing at him as if they were complaining. So he sent one of the people to inquire what were they complaining about. One of the people who had been pointing at Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala made a claim that Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala had taken some of his personal property. So Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala had himself submitted to court. When he was submitted to court, the judge was Kamaluddin Ash-Shahrazuri rahimahullah ta'ala. The judge was shocked that the ruler, and who does Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah have a precedence in this regard with? He has this precedence with Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu. How many of you are familiar with the story of Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu and the Jew? The Jew made a claim against Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu. I think the claim was regarding a shield. So Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu was submitted himself into a court even though he was Khalifa. And I think Al-Qadi Shuraih did the judgment. The judgment was in the favor of the Jew. When the judgment went in the favor of the Jew recited the kalima, meaning the shahada, accepted Islam, entered the fold of Islam, and said, I only did this to test the justice of Islam. Famous incident. But Nuruddin Zangi took the man to court, but Nuruddin Zangi won the case. When he won the case, he gave the property, whatever that was, to the man as a gift. But he only allowed himself to go to court. He said, I knew that this is my property, but I wanted to show the people the justice of Islam. Meaning, the purpose was to show the justice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Muslims to carry out on the face of the earth. So, the opening of Darul Adl was a court which was opened in Damascus, and he named it Darul Adl, the abode of justice. The reason for this was that some of the ministers of Nuruddin Zangi, when Damascus was conquered, they divided some of the land. Some people made complaints that the land was taken without justice. Additional to that, those ministers were disputing amongst themselves for a share of different land. So the main complaints were made against the uncle of Salahuddin Ayubi, whose name was Shaykh Asrar. When the complaints were made against the uncle of Salahuddin Ayubi, the reason being that the judge Kamaluddin would give the the correct judgments and everyone would comply. But the uncle of Salahuddin Ayubi would not comply with the judgments. So Nuruddin Zangi commanded that a court be opened called Darul Adl. As soon as this was done, Sherko went to and met the other ministers and said, none of you should file a complaint against me. We should resolve this amongst ourselves because I do not want Nuruddin Zangi to think I am unjust. So straight away they resolved all the differences amongst themselves. When this occurred, Nuruddin Zangi praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But how did the Darul Adl work? The Darul Adl worked that Nuruddin Zangi himself would spend 2 days a week in the Darul Adl. Himself, listening directly to the complaints of people. But he would not be alone. He would have jurists, fuqaha, jurists, and judges, qudat, attend court also to give judgments. So 2 days of his week he would give to Darul Adl. Now imagine if rulers were just today in every city in the Muslim world, in every city or in every major city, you had the minister of a city sitting in the court for 2 days a week, listening directly to the complaints of people. How much justice would be served to the people? I mean, this is one of the policies of Nuruddin Zangi, rahimahullah ta'ala. Who were his advisors? The advisors of Nuruddin Zangi, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of those advisors was Shaykh Umar al-Malla. Shaykh Umar al-Malla was from Hims, the city of Hims. Why was he called al-Malla? This related to his occupation. But he was a pious man. Every Ramadan, Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala would request from him bread to eat. Remember, eating from pious people as blessings. So Shaykh Umar al-Malla would send simple loaves of bread to him to eat. Nuruddin Zangi in the month of Ramadan would not eat anything else except the simple bread that Shaykh Umar al-Malla would send to him. Now what happened was when Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala ascended to power in the city of Halab, the ministers and the governors, they complained. They said that there is disobedience, meaning no law and order in the city of Halab and the surrounding areas. The only way of resolving this is by having people crucified and having terrible punishments for the thieves and for the brigands and the criminals. Meaning going beyond the boundaries of Sharia. Not applying Sharia correctly, but going beyond the boundaries of Sharia. This was their suggestion, the governors. So one of them said, Nuruddin Zangi will never accept this because he was known for his piety. The only way he would accept this is if Shaykh Umar al-Malla wrote this to him. So they approached Shaykh Umar al-Malla. When they approached him, Shaykh Umar al-Malla wrote a letter to Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala telling him that there is corruption, there is criminality, and no law and order in the city of Halab and the surrounding areas. The only way of resolving this problem is by placing strict punishments, meaning beyond the Sharia. So the letter reached Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah. He turned the letter around and he wrote words to the effect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the benefits of His masalih, what is in the benefit of His creation. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated is sufficient. We do not need to add additional laws, meaning punishments, additional punishments, because what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated is sufficient. And he sent the letter back to Umar al-Malla. When he sent that letter, Umar al-Malla read the letter out to the ministers and he said this. First he read his letter, his own letter, Umar al-Malla's letter, saying this is the letter of the ascetic to the king. Then he turned the letter around and he read the response of Nuruddin Zengi, and he said, this is the response of the king to the ascetic, meaning the ascetic should have advised him, but instead Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah was the one who advised him. But in another version of this narrative which I've read, is that when Nuruddin Zengi observed that in his kingdom there was, when he ascended to power, he realized that there was, in Damascus this occurred in Damascus. So not when he ascended to power, when he conquered the city of Damascus, he realized that there was no law and order. Umar al-Malak was the one who advised him that just apply the Sharia and do not go beyond that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the blessings of the Sharia, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create law and order in the kingdom. And this is what occurred. This is a great lesson for the rulers today, that when they rise to power, that some of them fear what will occur if we apply Sharia law. So some of them suggest we do a gradual, step-by-step process by where we apply Sharia. Recently, the Sultan of Brunei applied the hudud punishments, meaning by law. So he was given criticism by the Western world and the Western media. But alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept him in power. I mean, he is still in power. The Sultan of Brunei is Shafi'i in school, in madhab. So when he placed this legislation went through, this movement, meaning this lobby, which is known as the LGBTQ lobby, similar to the Zionist lobby, this is a vociferous lobby that goes against anyone who speaks anything critical regarding LGBTQ. Likewise, the Zionist lobby, they attempted to finish the Sultan of Brunei, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala supported him. But likewise, other rulers, when they come into power in Muslim countries, they fear the backlash of applying Sharia law. Of course, what we mean by Sharia law is applying Sharia law correctly according to the four Sunni schools. Because what we observe is the terrorist organizations like ISIS and other groups misinterpreting Sharia law and being unable to apply Sharia law correctly. Because there is a rule. That rule is that the hudud punishments, the corporal punishments, are not carried out during civil war. If there is no law and order, civil war. If there is civil war, not law and order, civil war. If there is civil war, the hudud punishments are not carried out. You must wait until the civil war has stopped and then carry out the hudud punishments. So these are simple rules that are not applied. Likewise, which I mentioned previously in the talk on the caliphate, the beheadings, public beheadings and displaying of heads, this was something prohibited by Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Someone may say, this occurred in the Battle of Badr. Yes, but the heads were not displayed in public areas. It occurred on the battlefield, but the heads were not displayed in public. So these groups, what they do is they display heads in public, and this causes hatred towards Sharia law. This is one of the many things why people despise Sharia law. So the additional policies of Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala relating to iqta'. Iqta' is giving portions of land to the soldiers. So what happened, the army of Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala, which comprised of thousands of people, the land that would be conquered, he would give farming land to those soldiers. But he would place the name, the title deed, on the name of the children of the soldier. So if the soldier died, who will inherit the land? The children. If the child was mature, then Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala would give them the land to farm and benefit themselves. But if the child was young, then Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala would employ an individual to overlook the land until the child would grow up. and then the land would be given. Now what benefit did this have? The benefit this had was that aside for fighting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the soldiers knew that if they died, their children have something to benefit from. Unlike groups in Pakistan and other areas, what happens if you have some people who are preachers or claimants to be ulama, they incite young people to go to jihad. They incite young people to go to jihad. Of course, they themselves do not go, and their own children do not go. But what happens, those young people who are radicalized, they leave, and I say radicalized, why? Because it's the incorrect interpretation of jihad. When they go to fight, without the sanctioning of a caliph or without the sanctioning of a legitimate government, they may die and they leave their mothers behind, or they leave their wives behind, or they leave their children behind, and they have no one to fend for them. But is this the policy of Islam? The answer is no. The caliphate, in the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he would only dispatch the armies for a limited period of time of 4 months. Every 4 months they would have to return. And he would also give a wage to the soldiers, so the soldiers were given a wage. Now some people, they go on tabligh to say that they are going in the way of Allah. But when they go on tabligh, they leave their families behind without their family. Some of them, they leave their families behind without having anything. Is this legislate? And they cite the examples of the companions did this. They say the companions did this. This is incorrect. Two differences. When the companions would leave, they would invite non-Muslims to Islam. They wouldn't go to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and invite Muslims. There's people who go to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa to do tabligh to Muslims. Not to invite the Jewish people to Islam, but to invite the people of Al-Aqsa, the last people that need our tabligh. They are the most, the best Muslims in the world are in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. If you go there, you will know. Yes, you will have some people who do not follow Islam correctly from the Palestinians, but the people who are in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and defend the masjid on a daily basis, some of them showed me their bullet marks in their stomachs, saying, this is the bullet mark I received from defending the masjid. Those people do not need your tabligh. The Jewish soldiers need your tabligh, the IDF and others. So the first difference was that they would go to call non-Muslims to Islam. The second difference was the tabligh later was, aside from the tabligh, when the companions would leave their homes, they would go out to fight in the way of Allah. In the army of the Khilafah, they would receive a wage from the government. So Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala had this policy that if these soldiers, aside from fighting for the sake of Allah, if they die, they have an insurance, a guarantee that someone will provide for their family. So this is why even in Kashmir, if individuals go out to fight in Kashmir, they cannot go. Why? Because you need the sanctioning and legislation of a government to permit you to go. Because if an individual goes, he leaves his dependents, his parents and his children and his wife, which is impermitted in Sharia. The sanctioning would have to happen from a legitimate government. Likewise, the army today should give a guarantee for their soldiers so they fight bravely. So this is a policy of Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah ta'ala, which is noteworthy. Likewise, he would have gardens or farms made for public endowment. Now, some of these things still exist in Damascus. Like in Damascus, every Friday morning or every Thursday morning, we would observe that a kitchen would open near a Shaykh Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Masjid, and people would come with their containers, and a man would fill their containers with food. This practice was inherited from the Ottomans. But what did the Ottomans do? they had an entire mountain given as waqf, as public endowment. Whatever produce would come from that mountain was distributed amongst the public for free. An entire mountain. Some say it's Jabal Shaykh. Why it's called Jabal Shaykh is because in relation to a Shaykh Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. Others say because the snow covers the mountain and the snow makes the mountain look like an old man with a white beard. So they call this mountain Jabal Shaykh. The produce that would come from Jabal Shaykh was distributed amongst the public. So Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala had this done also. Farms open, and in the farms the produce would be distributed amongst the public. There is a famous incident that occurred with Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala, where he caught, and I mentioned this recently regarding Salatul Istikhara, they caught a prince who had killed many Muslims. And Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala wanted to take a ransom for this prince so he can open one of these farms. But the ministers disagreed. They said, we should not release him because if he is released, then he will cause harm to the Muslims again. So Nuruddin Zangi, because of his honesty with Allah, performed Salatul Istikhara and released him. Took the ransom, but in the night, the man, when he was released, he died anyhow. So both things were achieved for him. And then he informed his ministers because of his truthfulness with Allah. But the ransom money was used to open farms which would then benefit the Muslims. And this is something that Muslims need to look into, that policies, meaning we have all these different Islamic groups in the Muslim world that want to benefit the Muslims. These are some of the policies that if these people released a manifesto, like the Labour Party released a manifesto, but of course that's a Trotskyite socialist manifesto. If Muslims had a manifesto where they mentioned the policies of the Khilafah when it is reformulated by Muslim rulers, what are the economic and social benefits for the Khilafah for the public? Because the public will not look at other policies, they will look at the economic and social benefits that the Khilafah will have. So a redistribution of wealth or awqaf of farms and different places where the produce of those farms will be distributed amongst the poor. Additional to this, you had al-khanat open. Al-khanat is public houses. What do we mean by public houses? Not the pubs that we have here. Public houses means lodgings for travelers. So when travelers would come, to keep them safe on the road, different lodgings were open, some of them free, funded totally by the government, so travelers and traders can have a safe route. But even if someone did this in today's day and age, they could have this subsidized by the government, meaning cheap residency for people, a cheap hotel system, like in Hajj. If the government subsidized some of the Hajj, what would happen? The hotel prices would go down. Why are the hotel prices high? Because of the corporation. But the prices of the hotel should be kept at a cheap price. So this was one of the many policies of Sultan Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala. The amount of money that was spent on these awqaf, the public endowments, was such that every month 30,000 gold coins were spent. 30,000 gold coins. Now, I was saying to someone on the way here that if Pakistan reintroduced just the Chandi rupee, because in the 1950s, Pakistan had the Chandi rupee, the silver rupee. If they reintroduced a Chandi rupee in Pakistan, this would greatly benefit the economy. Why? Because a Chandi rupee, if you save the coins and you open them up, you have a small container, you save the coins, you open them up in 50 years, would the value have diminished? The answer is no. You open them up in 100 years, would the value have diminished? No. Inflation would vary, but the real intrinsic value would remain in the gold and silver. So Pakistan should have a policy where they reintroduce the Chandi rupee. Of course, the IMF and others would wage war against Pakistan. But this usage of coins, silver, gold and silver coins, was what benefited the economy in that time. The value was intrinsic. But he would spend 30,000 gold coins monthly on just the awqaf, just the public endowment. So you can imagine in the year how much money was spent on the public endowments. Of course, how was it collected? One of the means, even though he had the ushr and the maks and all the different taxes relieved, if you gathered just the sadaqatul fitr, the zakat of the wealth of the Muslims, the jizya, and also the kharaj, these were different sadaqat and different things. If these are gathered, it is sufficient wealth to redistribute amongst the Muslims and non-Muslims, because the jizya is collected for the benefit of the non-Muslims. So when they become old, a pension is given to non-Muslims also. Why? Because in their youth, like Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said, we do not collect from them in their youth and leave them in their old age to rot. No, the non-Muslim citizens also benefit from this system. Sultan Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala had a Darul Hadith constructed. A Darul Hadith this Darul Hadith was one of the first Darul Hadith constructed in Damascus. And what he would do in the Darul Hadith is that the scholars of Hadith would sit down and they would recite the Hadith, and the ruler would listen and his ministers would listen, and they would benefit with knowledge. This kind of gathering is still done by the King of Morocco, one of the few rulers who still does this. But it's something that should be commonplace in the Muslim world, that gatherings of knowledge. He would also sit in gatherings of admonition, Sultan Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala. But the Darul Hadith was such a thing that it continued into the time of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. So Yahya bin Sharaf al-Nawawi, the Shaykh al-Islam, in his time there was also a Darul Hadith. Even Ibn Salah, the famous author of the Muqaddimah, one of the first works written on Ulum al-Hadith, that first work was written by him in Darul Hadith. All of this, the inception of all of this falls on the shoulders of Sultan Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala. Likewise, Sultan Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala had the titles removed from his name. So generally, you have different titles for kings. He had those titles removed. He commanded them to read out certain things relating to him which were truthful, but not things which were exaggerating. So throughout the kingdom, on the manabir, on the mimbars, on the pulpits, when they would read out his name on Jum'ah, they would not read out all those titles. Unlike the rulers prior to him from the Banu Umayyah and others, they would have grand titles read out. Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala avoided this. This is of course due to his simplicity. Why did he drop the taxes? One of the reasons was that one of the ministers came to him and he said, I saw a dream that I was taking a bath outside your door. Now Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala knew the interpretation of the dream. He said, this dream relates to dropping of the taxes, and he had the taxes relieved. When he had the taxes relieved, he wrote this to the Khalifa in Baghdad, and he also requested from the Khalifa that they read out on the manabir, on the mimbars, on the pulpits throughout the kingdom, that Nuruddin Zangi requests for the forgiveness of the people for any previous taxes. He requests the forgiveness of the people for any unjust previous taxes. And this was read out. Remember, Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala conquered over 50 cities by that time. So there were over 50 cities in his dominion at that time. Starting from one city, the city of Halab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expanded his territory to such a degree that he had over 50 cities in his territory. Even though technically a country does not need to be large to be powerful. You can have a small territory but still remain powerful. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the barakah, the blessings of his work, expanded his territory. Likewise, there was a famous incident which is Waq'atu Harim, which was a war that occurred in the year exactly 559. 559. Remember, 10 years prior to his passing away. When the army was not receiving any type of victory, Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala went to one of the pious people. They said, look at any disobedience your army is doing. And the pious person pointed out to some disobedience. He said, you have mazamir, flutes, and different musical instruments in your army, remove these. Straight away he gave the command that the musical instruments be removed from the army. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them victory in battle. At that time, the Crusaders had over 30,000 soldiers. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them victory because they removed the munkarat, the bad things that were contained in the army. Now, if today we apply that policy in the armies, that the more piety there is in the army, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them victory, even with qillatul asbab, even with less means. Even though the Quran commands believers to prepare for war, this entails manufacturing of weapons and training. This is a Sharia. This is Sharia. They must do this. But additional to that, we must remember the Battle of Badr. In the Battle of Badr, the Muslims had less means. They only had 8 swords, 2 mules, 313 men. The disbelievers had 1,000 fighters. Every fighter had a sword. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of the piety of the companions and their sincerity, created means by which they gained victory. Like the Muslims are encamped on the higher terrain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down rain, which became a blessing for the believers, drinking water for the believers, but a flood and mud for the disbelievers. Likewise, in the night, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them rest. They were able to sleep. The disbelievers had no sleep in the night. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the means. So today when people complain, they say, how can we reconquer Palestine? Meaning, at one point people boast of the Turkish and the Pakistani army. They boast regarding the armies. But when it comes to action in Kashmir or Palestine, they say, look, the army doesn't have resources, the army doesn't have this. Of course, the boasting finishes then. But what are these armies missing that the previous armies had? What are these armies missing what the army of Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala had? There is the sincerity and piety that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enabled Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala to instill this in the individuals of the armies. So, additional to this, when the incident in Dimyat is a region that was surrounded by the Franks, the Europeans at that time. When this occurred, Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala was sitting in the Dar al-Hadith, and a hadith was being recited, which is a hadith known as Musalsal. Musalsal hadith are those hadith which are recited from the Prophet ﷺ in the same way. Like if the Prophet ﷺ shook hands with someone, then the narrator shakes hands. Then the narrator narrates from him, shakes hands. This was a tasalsul bit tabassum, smiling. So the Prophet ﷺ smiled to the companion, and the companion smiled to his student smiled to his student. This hadith was recited. The people requested from Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala to smile. He refused to smile. He said, how can I smile when Dimyat is under attack? Meaning it's an obligation on the Muslims to repel the invaders. What is the lesson? The lesson is that yes, there are times of joyous occasions, but how we today can be joyous all the time when Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is under occupation, when the city of Jerusalem is under occupation, when Palestine as an entity is under occupation. Likewise in Kashmir, where the people are living in the largest jail today in Kashmir. So these are times when Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala is the role model for the rulers, the role model for all Muslim rulers. Likewise, during this time, meaning during the incident of what occurred in Harim, was one of the soldiers or one of the ministers saw a dream of the Prophet ﷺ saying, tell Nuruddin that the army has dispersed, the Franks. They have dispersed. The soldier or the person in the dream said, how will Nuruddin Zangi believe me? The Prophet ﷺ said to him, tell him and inform him that you one day were on the slope of a hill alone, and you supplicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this particular dua that Allah give you victory. Inform him of this and he will believe you. The soldier or the minister went and informed Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah that the Franks have dispersed. After besieging, they have dispersed, meaning in those days there was no news like there is today. Nuruddin Zangi believed him, but then he said, what sign do you have? He informed him, remember when you were on the slope of a hill and you supplicated with this supplication. So Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it shows also the belief of Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah, a ruler that had a connection with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No ruler will ever gain victory unless he has that belief, meaning the correct belief, and the Islamic history has shown it. So this was an incident that occurred, and one of the karamat of Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala. Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala passed away in the year 569. Now prior to passing away, in the year 564, 5 years before passing away, he dispatched Shaykh Asaduddin to Egypt. And this was on the request of the rulers of Egypt at the time. Because what happened, the Crusaders made incursions into Egypt, and some of the governors of Egypt were aligning themselves with the Crusaders. So Al-Adid Al-Ubaydi, the pseudo-Khalifa of the Fatimid dynasty, sent some of the hair of his women as a gesture to Nuruddin Zangi that helped me. So Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah wrote a letter. He was in Halab at the time, not in Damascus. He wrote a letter to Asaduddin Sherko. Asaduddin rode in one day from Hims to Halab. This surprised Nuruddin Zangi, who then chose him, Asaduddin, to lead the expedition in order to conquer Egypt. Sherko demanded that his nephew Salahuddin go with him. This was in the year 564, and as I stated, that Salahuddin was born in 532, that would make him 32 years old, Islamically, at the time. Meaning according to the lunar calendar. Salahuddin Ayubi accompanied his uncle, and they entered Egypt very easily. because the ruler was expecting them to enter. When they entered, the first thing, what was the first thing that Salahuddin requested from his uncle? The first thing that he requested from his uncle was to visit the grave of Al-Imam Muhammad bin Idris al-Shafi'i, because he was Shafi'i of school. So both uncle and nephew went to the grave of Al-Imam Muhammad bin Idris al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. This was on the first day. What occurred 2 months and 5 days later, Shaykh Asrar passed away. So the ministers and generals of the army and the captains, they elected Salahuddin Ayubi to be the governor of Egypt. So at this point he was governor of Egypt. Remember, this was unexpected. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed this in the lap of Salahuddin Ayubi for a greater goal. Of course, this would never have been achievable, the conquering of Jerusalem, without the role of Nuruddin Zangi and his policies. Because in 583, Salahuddin Ayubi will reconquer Jerusalem for the Muslims in 583. Nuruddin Zangi passed away in 569. So in 14 years after the passing away of Nuruddin Zangi, it is possible for Salahuddin Ayubi to conquer Jerusalem. But would this have been possible without the planning of Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala and the piety of Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah ta'ala? The answer is Nuruddin Zangi was one of the asbab, the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for this ummah, for this nation. So when Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala was governor of Egypt, of course many incidents occurred during those years of ruling. The wealth of Egypt that was acquired, he listed all the wealth that was acquired from the public treasury and everything, and wrote a letter to Nuruddin Zangi mentioning all of those things. Nuruddin Zangi then wrote a letter commanding him how to distribute that wealth distribution again, meaning if the Muslim world had correct wealth distribution, the poverty would be alleviated to a degree. Just look at the natural resources in the Muslim world. Salt alone, Himalayan salt that we have, the pink salt, that Himalayan salt comes from Pakistan. But Pakistan cannot sell that salt in accordance with its correct rate because of its IMF loans. That Western corporations will take that salt, sell the salt, benefit and profit from the salt that they sell, and reduce some of the loan that Pakistan has taken, but yet they are adding interest to the loan also. Look at the contradiction. Likewise, the natural resources of the oil wealth in the Middle East, how the natural resources are distributed amongst the Muslims and non-Muslim citizens of the Middle East and that region. Because natural resources are one of the major reasons for war in that region. Before finishing, two things to be mentioned. One is Salahuddin Ayubi rahimahullah ta'ala and his conquering of Yemen. This occurred in the year 569. And lastly, his victory in Jerusalem and the conquering of Jerusalem occurred in 583. Of course, there are many more details that can be mentioned, but I will suffice to that extent, finishing exactly at 5:59 as promised. Inshallah ta'ala, we will open up for questions and answers. Are there any questions or written questions or? Brother at the back, I mentioned that people at the back will definitely ask questions.
So the question is just reading a bit from the Brother, you have mentioned, there is a reading that there was some potential conflict between Nuruddin and Salahuddin. Could you shed some light on the
what the conflict was about was, at one point in the history, one of them requested reinforcements. So it was in fact Nuruddin Zengi who requested reinforcements during the sieging of Dimyat, which I mentioned. When this occurred, which was in the year 565, so Egypt was conquered in 564. A year later, Nuruddin Zengi demanded reinforcements. Salahuddin Ayubi excused himself from sending reinforcements, which upset Nuruddin Zengi. But later on, the army, the Franks were dispersed. They dispersed, and the incident of the dream with the Prophet ﷺ occurred. But what occurred after that was the uncles and the father of Salahuddin, who was still alive, advised Salahuddin Ayubi to never be treacherous with Nuruddin Zengi. What happened? They said to him, "Do you see us as more loyal than anyone to you?" He said, "Yes." Meaning the uncles and the father. They said, "Do you see us as your most loyal subjects?" He said, "Yes." They said, "If Nuruddin ever ordered us to behead you, we would behead you. That's how loyal we are to Nuruddin. So imagine everyone else." This was an incident that occurred. So that incident, what Western historians may make of it, because remember, when you read English books, they like adding their romanticized version of events, or their take slant, because they would say our version is romanticized. They always place their slant on these incidents. But that was actually the dispute that occurred.
When you look at our states, generally speaking, on an individual, collective basis, whether it's locally, nationally, or globally, what hope do you see for the Ummah, economically, politically, socially, going forward?
Remember, hope is always there, because despair is one of the major sins. Despair is a major sin. But at the same time, Ashratu Sa'a, the signs of the end of times, and eschatology relates to our modern times. We must always look at our current situation in the light of what the Prophet ﷺ foretold in the end of times, as well as what is an obligation upon us. As long as we are doing what is an obligation upon us, we should never despair.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Just a question in regards to the state of the Muslim Ummah at the moment and some of the just policy that you talked about at the time of the Sultan. One of the big differences I see is that at that time the Muslim world was economically free. At this moment in time, much of the Muslim world is governed by tyrants and puppets placed by Western interests who are effectively tied to a Western economic system on which they are entirely dependent.
Which I mentioned as well.
As soon as they try to do anything, then effectively the American Federal Reserve or any other IMF, they start introducing policy which cripple their economy overnight and potentially could make their population very poor overnight. Could you suggest any possible way as to how the current Muslim world can perhaps move away from whole interdependence on this Western economic system, which in many ways is crippling their nations because they're forever paying the interest?
See, the practical step for rulers would be, meaning this would be the practical step I would take, is people who are specialists in their country in economics, as well as Islamic rulings related to economics. A body of consultation should be formed, which, as far as I know, no Muslim country has done. Meaning a specialist body of consultation where you have people from all backgrounds advising the government with regard to, meaning a think tank, which, as far as I know, no one has done. Even Pakistan, with the current government, they have not formed a think tank with regard to economy. even though Pakistan has the talent to do so, meaning within Islamabad University or other good universities of Pakistan, you have enough people who are even educated in the West, who have the know-how regarding economics, as well as people who are trained in Islamic finance and Islamic economics. So the first step would be to form a body, a think tank that can correctly advise the government. Secondly, what I mentioned in my speech, if you were here, that we live in a post-colonial Anglo power structure which controls world economy. So I said the policies carried out by Nuruddin Zangi would be seen in a different light today. But one of the steps that I believe that should be taken by Pakistan is reintroducing the Chandi coin. Now, I am not well versed on economy, but as far as I have heard, that there is an international law that prohibits reintroducing, those of you who are well informed can tell me, reintroducing silver and gold as a currency. I've heard of this.
Okay. When some Muslim rulers tried to do this, perhaps in North Africa by Gaddafi, he wanted to introduce gold as effective currency of Africa. We know what happened to him in terms of his...
Pakistan is a different case.
But as soon as you attack any policy...
Why Pakistan is a different case? You see, what Gaddafi wanted to do was replace the paper money with gold. I'm not suggesting to do that straight away. Reintroduce a Chandi rupee, which is different, meaning you still have the rupee, the paper rupee, but you just reintroduce one coin, which is made from silver. This is the first step. A country like Pakistan can never be invaded easily. Even a city like Karachi cannot be invaded. I guarantee you, any government of the world who tries invading even a city like Karachi, they cannot hold the city of Karachi. It's a crazy city, meaning our nation is crazy. You cannot take over Pakistan. That's why there are so many people attempting to sabotage Pakistan through different means. But Pakistan can never be invaded and held. Even if, like Iraq, the way they invaded Iraq, they can never do that with Pakistan. And this is a good thing. But the first step taken by Pakistan should be reintroducing the Chandi rupee. This would be the first step. Meaning, at the moment, they cannot get rid of the IMF and the Federal Reserve totally. But another step is the retaking the natural resources. Forcefully taking the natural resources, meaning the army should step in and take the resources of the country. This is something, these are the only practical steps I can think of now. But like I said, if the first step is not taken, which is forming a think tank, when you have hundreds of brains and minds far superior than our own, they can come out with great solutions to this economic problem. But if governments are carrying out their own solutions with one individual's advice or two individuals, and some of them may be former workers for the IMF, then we will continue with just the lemon price in Pakistan, I think is how many rupees, 150 rupees or whatever poor economy that they have at the moment.
But Yashar, during the past 20 years, the Pakistan government after the government, during the past 20 years, so much of the World Bank's money has been borrowed into Pakistan, for which Pakistan is paying huge riba, so much that these alternatives which you are suggesting, they are the very practical ones. But before that, how we overcome this huge bridge? We have done during those 20 years, all the consultants, Pakistani originals, qualified in the World Bank's finance systems, and they are rooted there, and that's the big hurdle.
One thing I would suggest regarding that is, with the interest that has accumulated, I've heard of some developing country, one particular developing country, and again, don't take me on these facts, that they refused to pay the IMF the interest. They said we will pay the original loans without the interest, and this was accepted. So this, I believe, may be achievable, but they can
Well,
pay
if
back.
that has been accepted, then this has been disturbing me, which I have expressed out, and that's a good precedent.
Yes.
If that is correct.
This is less political. I have listened to you. Thank you very much. It was very, very good. We started from William the Conqueror and where you ended up 1066. And maybe a matter of motivation for the youngsters. Alhamdulillah, I'm not boasting myself, but I have visited Damascus, just like you said. I visited the Umayyad Mosque, the Salahuddin Bazaar in Damascus, next to the Umayyad. But I've noticed that you never mentioned the other thing, like Salahuddin's castle and Khan Bishwali. Can you remember all that? I have visited, but it's a matter of motivation.
You know, did you go Egypt as well?
No, I didn't go through Egypt.
You'd be shocked what he done in Egypt. So he's visited Damascus. I went to Damascus. There's many achievements of Salahuddin which still exist, and Nuruddin Zangi. Nuruddin Zangi rahmatullah is buried on the western side of the old city, near the Hanafi Masjid, which is now known as the Nuriya. And this is where the Shadhli order, they do their hadra on a weekly basis. So previously a Shaykh Shukri al-Luhafi rahmatullah would carry out and lead the hadra. Prior to him, Shaykh Mustafa Turkamani, prior to him, Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Shahuri, currently Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Khatib, who is the head of the Shadhli order today. But they carry out this hadra in the Masjid of Nuruddin Shaheed, and the grave is right next to the masjid, and you can go and visit. Well, if you can enter Damascus today, you can still go and visit the grave. Likewise, what you're mentioning, the different fortresses and different Krakti Shavalis was in fact conquered by Malik Baybars. It was conquered by Malik Baybars, which is a later kingdom, the Mamalik kingdom. But when I went to Egypt, I was more astounded by the achievements of Salahuddin Ayubi in terms of construction, meaning the buildings that were made. For some reason, the edifices there are greater in size. So again, like I said, this subject is a deep subject, and we need to be informed of our history, inshaAllah ta'ala.
This one, fortunately, the Aga Khan, believe it or not, he's trying to rebuild that hill or where Salahuddin encamped. And
I didn't know that.
It's I visited it still bit by bit, and it's donkeys were carrying the bricks on top because it's so fragile. Anyway, that's a matter of motivation for people to read about it. Damascus is so beautiful, or was, I don't know.
It's still preserved, inshallah.
Yeah,
Damascus is
inshallah.
preserved.
How to make dua.
Inshallah, we'll make dua and conclude, inshallah. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ما هو أهله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها. اللهم ارحم الشهيد نور الدين زنگي رحمه الله تعالى وصلاح الدين الأيوبي رحمه الله تعالى. اللهم ارحم جميع السلاطين الصالحين من أمة سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، وانفعنا بقصصهم واجعلنا من الذين يعتبرون بما مضوا بقصصهم وتاريخهم يا رب العالمين. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.